The radars of the future are smart, connected, and being built today. Raytheon is pushing the limits of advanced manufacturing from the ground up, building on a 60-year legacy of innovation infused with today's most innovative technologies. In our world-class radar development facilities, robots work autonomously alongside skilled engineers, setting new benchmarks for efficiency, productivity, quality assurance, and safety. Cutting-edge automation and process optimization are helping reduce cost and increase speed of delivery. From autonomous material movement and unmanned vehicles to an industry-first dual robotic system, advanced manufacturing at Raytheon enables production to be smarter, safer, and faster, giving engineers and technicians time to solve the complex challenges of tomorrow. Raytheon, reimagining the future of radars.
ありがとうございます。ようこそお越しくださいました。
Thank you very much. I have come in. We have a 75-minute program with true specialists. Japan's issues in defense industry are something which we are going to seriously discuss, and we have this wonderful opportunity to do so. I would like to thank Jim Angeles, ISIC, Japan, who have put on wonderful programs one after another. I am very appreciative to them and surprised. Today, the four individuals we have to speak are introduced already on the ISIC website. Without hesitation, I would like to move immediately to give the microphone to our first speaker, Mr. Igata Akira. Please keep this person's name in your memory for a long time. He, unlike myself, about to retire, he still has 20, 30, maybe 40 years to continue the dialogue about the economic state of Japan. So may I now turn to Mr. Igata.
Thank you very much. I look forward to participating with you today. I am Igata from Tama University. Now, all of the slides during the announcements were in Japanese, but actually, English versions are also available on the ISIC website. So please do have a look. So can you bring up my slides now, please? Today, I'll be talking about Japan's economic security policy and the aerospace and defense industries. First of all, internationally, economic security began to get interest against the following kind of background. And I will explain that. And then I will explain how Japan's economic security policy has evolved. And then I will conclude by talking about the economic security promotion law that just passed and the national security strategy that the Kishida administration is revising and the implications for the defense and aerospace industries. Next slide, please. Next slide. One more. This is simply my resume. I'm at the Tama University. I've been at US think tanks. I'm also an economic advisor. Next slide, please. So, first of all, let me simply go over the reasons that the term economic security has gained attention international. There are various reasons, depending on the country. Some countries use the term economic security like Japan. but some in Europe use economic resiliency, supply chain resiliency, or specific economic statecraft. The emphasis can be slightly different on particular types of economic coercion. There are basically two factors, China and technology. So that is the main reason that economic security, broadly speaking, has gotten more attention. China's diplomacy has changed, and there's attention given to human rights violations. There are many factors within the China factor, even within the technology factor. There could be technology that is mostly developed for civil purposes, but that has potential military applications. AI, drones, quantum computing, 3D printing, they're all for the average citizen, for civilians, but even if the developer thinks that, they can all have military applications. Thus, corporate activity has increasing implications for security. And therefore, that also increases the attention on economic security for those two reasons, mainly China and technology. Next slide, please. I'll now go over the evolution of Japan's economic security policy. There's a lot written on this slide, but I have 2 points to make really. First, in the Kishida administration, there's a new position for economic security minister and a new law, the economic security promotion law. So with the advent of the Kishida administration, it looks like there's a lot of progress on economic security. But in fact, it goes back to 3 years ago. During the Abe administration, the discussion was quite advanced already. In May of 2019, there was a proposal to make a National Economic Council and a control tower for these types of issues. And it was officially established then. And relevant ministries had positions and organizations created to deal with economic security. We then had the Suga administration, and there was a recommendation there that economic security strategy should be formulated. There were 16 fields that were identified then that were identified as being important for Japan's economic security. And that is evident in the recently passed law and its 4 pillars. Next slide, please. And the second important thing I'd like to get across is that this new policy passed, but between Japan and the US, but also between Japan and Australia, US, Japan, Australia, India, the Quad. On the diplomatic front, Japan must be solidly working on protecting infrastructure, supply chain, resiliency, technology promotion. Japan has been active in these areas too. Next slide, please. Aside from this, reorganization in METI, MOFA, JMOD, the financial agency, when you think of economic security, it depends on the agency, but they all have positions and organizations that deal with it. For example, in the police, they have an economic security project team in the National Police Agency to gather risk data. And they also can provide these data to companies, and they support companies by helping them prevent leaks. And for 3 years, there's already been a lot of comprehensive work done on economic security. And it's only because under the current framework, not enough could be done that this law was passed. Next slide, please. And so the economic security promotion law that passed on May 11th has 4 pillars. I will talk about the thinking behind them and about how things might go from here. Please bear in mind that the concept of economic security and the aerospace and defense industries, and that the relationship between the two is not necessarily clear in the law itself. That is the way I perceive it. Next slide, please. First of all, the supply chain. The goal here is for important strategic materials that the people cannot do without. We have to build a stable situation. Specific important products, the government can ask for a supply plan to be made for them. If the good in question is indeed important, then the government can give a subsidy to help change sources of supply. And the government can also build up reserves. But for the aerospace and defense industries, specific important goods, what are they in fact? The law does not state this in detail. Semiconductors, they would be included, right? Batteries, pharmaceuticals, rare earth minerals, these would all be included, right? This was the sort of discussion that happened. But how about the supply chain for the defense industry, for the aerospace industries? It's not clear in the text of the law. Another important question is that when one thinks about stable supply, there are 3 big choices, I believe. First of all, you try to get everything back in Japan, but that's not realistic. I think that everyone can understand that. At the same time, then, things that don't exist in allies or partners will just have to eliminate from our supply chain. That's not realistic either. So what will we build here? What will we rely on from partners and allies? And for other countries, then what degree of dependence is acceptable? I think that's the kind of discussion we'll have going forward. Next slide, please. Next is non-disclosure of patents. There's a new process that allows for packets to remain secret if there could be potential military application. So for a particular patent, let's say the government decides it could have military applications, so please keep it secret. If it had been published, then they may have gotten more profit. And so I think there will be discussion. Is it possible to calculate the amount of lost profit that might be profitably subsidized, shall we say? Next slide, please. The third pillar is public-private technological cooperation. The government is going to try to make a development chain for technology, including subsidies for the private sector. So what is important technology? A new forum of discussion, including the private sector, is to be established to talk about just that. But when it comes to the aerospace and defense industries, would they have access to these budgets? That remains to be discussed, because one imagines that space, oceans, quantum, and AI, since they're written there, but the question becomes, to what extent can the aerospace and defense use them? And how aggressively can the aerospace and defense industries go after these funds? So that's still an open question. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm trying to speak slowly, but it seems like it's taking time to interpret. I'll try to slow down a bit. The fourth pillar is critical infrastructure. This also is concerned with the safety and stability of infrastructure that's important for the lives of our citizens. And there are important areas that have been specified, 14 areas. Large companies, what kind of software and hardware might expose them to risk? To some extent, the government can intervene and give advice. In certain cases, if the software or hardware entails high risk, the government, according to this legislation, can issue recommendations. However, once again, there is an important point of discussion for the aerospace and defense industries. Infrastructure that's critical to the lives of the citizens does not really include the defense industry, does it? So how does the defense industry approach this? As to aerospace, the aerospace industry, certainly this includes critical infrastructure, but it's not clear yet for space. Let's say that we cannot trust anything foreign, so we have to make everything domestically. This would be criticized as being not economic security, but protectionism. What if the WTO were to criticize us for that? Our response is not yet clear. Next slide, please. This is my last point. Currently, under the Kishida administration, there is a discussion underway to revise the national security strategy. The LDP just issued a recommendation on revision of the strategy. But that recommendation does not include the term economic security. If you look at the text, though, supply chain risk must be countered with a proper structure. This is exactly the same kind of thinking as the supply chain pillar. AI, drones, quantum, cyber, increased R&D investment. This is exactly the public-private partnership pillar. And important functions of society in times of crisis must be protected. This is exactly the critical infrastructure pillar. So even though the term economic security appears nowhere, this LDP NSS recommendation includes a lot of the substance of the economic security promotion law. Economic security policy. How should the aerospace and defense industries be approached? There's work to be done to clarify and bring out the relationships. Thank you very much.
ありがとうございま
Thank
し
you
た、岩田さ
very
ん。
much, Igata-san.
では、次のスピーカーをご紹
Next,
介したいと思
I
い
would
ま
like
す
to。introduce our next speaker.
新井久光さんは、
His-
今日のパネリストの
Hisamitsu
中では、
Arai,
最
among our
も
panelists
経験
today,
の豊富な
is
シニア
the
な
one
方
with
であり
the
ます。
most senior and advanced experience.
1990年代の半ばに、
In the mid-90s,
今日の防衛省で
at
装備の担
today's
当をなさっていまし
defense
た。
ministry, he was in charge of equipment.
その後、特許庁の長官を務めておられます。
He followed that by being the commissioner of the patent office,
その時のご経験をも
Japan
と
Patent
に、
Office, and
た
based
く
on
さ
that
んの知的財産に
experience,
関する書物も
he
お持ちです。
has published many articles and publications about intellectual property
この国、日本の中で、おそら
for
く最も
Japan,
豊かな知的
in
財産に関
Japan
する知
to
見を
create the
持ってお
most,
いでの
he
方だ
is
と
the
言
holder
っ
of
て間違
many
いない
of
と
the
思いま
most
す。
important and productive opinions about intellectual property in our country.
以上をもちまして、それではマイクロフォンを新井さんにお渡ししたいと思います。よろ
I
しくお
would
願いし
now
ま
like
す。
to hand the microphone over to Mr. Arai. Thank you for your introduction. I am Arai. As you discussed, I had the experience of being in charge of equipment at the Ministry of Defense, so I've been interested in this subject for a long time. Currently, the subject of economic security is very important. And where Japan's industry, defense industry fits in and how to strengthen that is a pressing topic, I believe. Let me ask for the next slide, please. Japan's economic policy is now in its third phase post-war. The first phase started with the Treaty of San Francisco, where Japan embarked in a recrudescence in industry that was 40 years from the 1950s. The economic policy during this time was an industrial policy that called for the joint efforts of the government and industry. The results of that were the recovery of Japan and its rapid growth, which came to the point of Japan as number one in the 1980s, a top-class industrial power. The second phase starts in the 1990s with the Malta Conference and the end of the Cold War, approximately 30 years. That second phase lasted. The economic policy at this time was to leave the economics to the private industry. It was a new neoliberal globalism. Many private industries and companies were placed more emphasis on overseas investment than on internal development. As a result, unfortunately, we got the so-called lost 30 years. Japan's economy did not grow terribly much during that period. The third phase is our current phase. The economic policy of the current phase is economic security. Trump's triggered by the sanctions against Japan, then faced the new corona and the global supply chain issues. And now we have the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, which is creating a new type of economics. The economic security policy calls for protecting one's own economy by oneself. Government and private industry are to join their strengths to keep in mind economic security as they manage their companies. Next slide, please. Currently, each country in the world is, in order to preserve its own interests, engaged in a tough economic competition. In the US, under President Biden, we have seen an assertion of Buy American policies, made in US policies, large amounts of R&D investments. In other words, for the US, it seeks to develop technology internally and develop economically internally to give those things priority. That's the fundamentals of the US policy. In China, they have state capitalism, where the government leads the industry, the efforts of economic efforts of private industry, where they call it the fusion of industry and military. In EU, they have announced a new industrial strategy, which involves strategic materials, not to rely on foreigners, that effectively an independent policy. Japan has been progressing or advancing a new capitalism. Let me ask for the next slide, please. The economic security law was established on May 11th. Let's protect our own economy. We cannot have security without technological strength and ability, and that requires economic security. As Igata sensei discussed, this has direct emphasis. It does not have information about the advanced aircraft industry and the like. They follow 4 pillars to think about defense. They have very large demands on defense. The first is the critical infrastructure, obtaining the critical infrastructure. For defense industry, the defense industry is an important critical infrastructure for the country. And we have to obtain defense industry under this structure. The second is the supply chain stability for critical materials. We have to have the ability to obtain sufficient materials for the defense industry. The third is the development of cutting-edge technologies. Since these are important technologies, we have to be able to develop them internally within the country. The fourth is secret patents. Defense industry have an importance for secrets, so it's important to be able to maintain secret patents. We need to urgently introduce security clearance system. That's an important matter. Next slide, please. When we think about the above, we have to strengthen our defense industry, and I have 3 proposals for doing that. The first proposal has to do with formulation of national defense industrial guidelines. The establishment of the security policy have a first and second part. The second part talks about establishment of semi-government cooperation in new fields and the discussion of ways to procure better technology. What we have now was something that was put forth by the Ministry of Defense in 2014, the technical infrastructure law. There had not been such a joining together in the past. We had on Paul the three principles. The second proposal I have to do has to do with drones, electromagnetic waves, and so forth. Based on the special law we would establish. The feature of new technology fields would be that they are often led by private industry, where the speed of industrial development is faster, and where Japan's response is behind those of foreign countries. In the past, under the way that we procured technology, we are not able to keep up with other countries. So we need flexibility and agility to create a bureau within the Ministry of Defense, which would look for the ability to gather and analyze intelligence information, which also would have technology innovation, procurement aspects, and the ability to train appropriate personnel. My third is the establishment of defense exclusive manufacturers for existing fields. Our current, we would have participation by current defense manufacturers, and we would need to recruit new ones. Japan, after the war, we have had the participation of post-war manufacturers, and we have shown results very efficiently from that. However, given the current situation, there are many companies who are in very difficult straits. We need to have dedicated manufacturers in the same way that foreign countries have. The reorganization cannot be left only to, or it will take too long if we leave this up to individual companies. Japan is the only buyer, and so it needs to discuss well with its suppliers, determine its goals, thank them for their past contributions, and move to a quick new rearrangement. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank
you, Arai-san.
次はジム・ショフにお願いしたいと思いま
I
す。
next would like to move to Jim Schoff.
このジム・ショフは
Jim
US
Schoff
Japan Alliance
is
の
at the US
マネージャー
Japan
として
Alliance, where he's a manager.
一貫して大変貴重な仕事をしてくださった
He
一
has
人
done
で
a
す。
very important job there,
今何をしているか
integrated
は
job, and
彼自身に説明していただい
I
て
would like him to explain
早速マイクロフォン
himself
を
about what he's
渡したい
working
と思
on
います。
now, and so I turn to him and hand him the microphone.
Well, thank you very much, Taniguchi-san, and it's great to be with you all. I appreciate the opportunity today. I'm Jim Schoaf, I'm a senior director at Sasakawa Peace Foundation USA, and I run something called a new initiative called the US-Japan Next Alliance Initiative. And this is an initiative focused primarily on new and emerging challenges for the US-Japan alliance. And of course, we're focusing a lot this year on economic security. Now, why are we doing that? As Arai-san alluded to, because there is an important transition underway from a techno-globalist economic and innovation framework that is one that it takes advantage of reduced barriers to trade, investment, and supply chain development and harmonized standards, to a framework increasingly techno-nationalist, where countries intervene often to advantage their own high-tech industries. But we had a brief experience with this in the 1980s and 1990s between the United States and Japan. But this new techno-nationalist era will likely be long and intense because the stakes are higher than before. Today, we have great power competition coinciding with the fourth industrial revolution. And this technology is potentially transformative, where AI, big data, quantum computing, robotics, and faster communications might all combine in a way that gives the early leader an unassailable position. And the fear of losing this competition is prompting huge research and development investment and multilateral partnerships. And the allies, the US and Japan, see an opportunity to cooperate. We need a big innovation ecosystem, including data sharing, to compete. And we need to be confident with information protections in order to collaborate. And we need to align our strategies and funding for efficiency and effectiveness. So I think this is the challenge ahead of us. So what's next? In bilateral meetings that our initiative has convened recently, it's clear to me that the United States and Japan are aligned very well in terms of how we assess the challenge that we face and the kind of strategies we want to employ. But the challenge is, can we adapt our alliance structure and ways that we cooperate and domestic rules fast enough to keep up? So we have a great tradition of science and technology cooperation, and our trust relationship is as strong as ever. But a combination of legal differences, cultural gaps, and our legacy of economic competition in the past is holding us back. And I think we need to overcome this in order to reach our potential. So Japan's new economic security legislation that we've heard about today, especially in the areas of supply chain resiliency and secret patents, is a good first step. And other recent policy changes in Japan on deemed exports, investment screening, research integrity, also help to harmonize our approach, but there's much more to do. I think the three big hurdles that we face are, number one, gaps in our bilateral perception of dual use technologies. Number two, difficulty for both of us, but even more so for Japan, in connecting the private sector to national strategy. And number three, harmonizing our information protection regimes. So if we can go to the first slide, please. I use this slide to give a feel for how research is funded and conducted in Japan compared to the United States. These two flow charts, they're not the same scale. You can see the percentages there, but I show it to highlight a couple of things. One is to show the relatively smaller role that Japanese government funding plays in the national picture compared to the US. And another is how little Japanese government research funding goes to the business sector directly. That is, from the green to the dark blue. Also, international contributions, or rest of world, which is in light blue, are very small in Japan. There is a concerted effort underway to expand the international component of its scientific endeavors, and this presents an opportunity. But again, we need harmonized information protections to facilitate that. Can we go to the next slide, please? This The data from this slide is a little bit, a few years old, but the ratios are even more dramatic today. The key point is that the private sector really dominates research and development spending and has for many years. And most applied science breakthroughs are promoted or made in the private sector. This year alone, in 2022, research and development spending by 5 US companies alone, Amazon, Meta, Apple, Microsoft, and Alphabet, will exceed $160 billion, or about the same as the entire US government, and more than Japan's entire private sector. So on the left-hand side, somebody said the slide is not so clear. The green is showing the rise of the percentage of private sector R&D funding in the United States, and the blue, declining blue line is the federal role on that front. And the slide to the next of it, to the right, shows on the top the oversized role that certain private companies, non-defense private companies play, commercial private companies play in the research and development. On the lower side is defense companies, which are important, but play less of a role in where a lot of the research and development funding is coming from. So for Alliance Defense Innovation on the government side, I think we should strengthen relationships between, in the Defense Department, there's a Undersecretary for Research and Engineering, or R&E. This relationship needs to be strengthened between R&E and the Japanese Ministry of Defense and ATLA, the Acquisition Technology Logistics Agency, and with METI, because that's where the private commercial connection is. Traditionally, the main alliance defense research and development link has been between the Ministry of Defense and ATLA and the US Defense Department's Acquisition and Sustainment Offices, or ANS. But the US center of gravity for defense innovation now is in R&E. So strengthening those connections and adding the METI piece to that, I think, will be important. Can we go to the next slide, please? This slide shows what could be part of a strategy to strengthen private sector cooperation with government R&D efforts in an alliance context. This concept I proposed for a public-private advisory council to support the US-Japan Joint High-Level Committee on Science and Technology Cooperation. Japan is actually, under the economic security legislation, already creating a domestic version of this as part of its new economic security legislation to promote new technology innovations. So we could perhaps do something that draws from the private sector, national laboratories, and scientific organizations as an advisory council in both countries, and do this in a bilateral manner, whether it's for the Joint High-Level Committee specifically, or perhaps with a bit more of a dual-use focus. We can also initiate more collaborative projects between Japanese research institutes and universities with the US Department of Energy national laboratories. I have some examples that we've already started that I can talk about, but there are many more opportunities in different areas. A lot of this work is not necessarily classified or defense specific, but it is also not usually public, and it can have a defense application. So it's a good in-between in the dual use dynamic. Overall in Japan, for next steps, I think a second edition of the economic security legislation would be useful to address some of the information protection issues, but also to support defense industry in Japan. In particular, loosening restrictions on overseas investment by Japanese defense companies, particularly in the United States, I think would be a big improvement. So having more direct investment and joint ventures between US and Japanese firms is one potential avenue. In addition, security clearances should be allowed to be given in the non-defense private sector to facilitate some classified or better controlled private sector research collaboration between the US and Japan. More flexible export control authority to cover research would also be helpful. Having a classified court or dispute resolution process to go along with the secret patent addition. Clarifying sole designated authority for security information protection and disclosure in Japan, similar to the US National Disclosure Policy Committee, would be useful. Developing a cadre of information security professionals in Japan, like the GS 0080 class, where somebody can spend their entire career in the area of information and technology protection, would be useful as well. And it's also important for Japan to take credit and get public recognition for the advances that it's already made. To some extent, the reputation that Japan has of not being strong enough on information protections is not as true as it was before. Japan has made improvements. So getting recognition for the improvements that have been made is also important. So I think I'll stop there and look forward to the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
はい、ジムさん、ありがとうございました。
Thank you,
ずっ
Jim
と
Shaw.
ずっと待っててくださった大上将軍に、
Now, Mr. Oe, General Oe, who has waited patiently all this
マイクロ
time,
フォンを渡したいと思いますが、
is the next person I want to give the microphone to.
航空自衛隊での長いキャリアには、
He has a long career in the
ハーバー
Air
ドの
Self-Defense
ケネディ
Force.
スクールですと
He's
か、
also been at the Harvard Kennedy School,
アメリカの国防
US
総合大学
Air Defense School
で学んだと
College.
いうご経験もお持ちです。
He also has experience there.
それでは大上さん、よろしくお願いいたし
So
ます。
thank you, Mr. Oe. May I turn it over to you?
はい、ありがとうございます。
Thank you.
本日は経済安全保障と
Today, we're going to talk about this important theme of economic and national security. Thank you for inviting me. I left as the Air Self-Defense Force Fly Division Manager in August 2017. And since that time, I've had a deep sense of crisis about the situation facing Japan's defense industry. Since retiring, I've been talking about the need to maintain, foster, and strengthen Japan's defense production technology base. And that requires action not only by the Ministry of Defense, but the government and the nation as a whole, including private industry, universities, and other research institutions. The recent enactment of the economic security law is a real step forward. However, as this seminar points out, there are still issues in the most important area of the defense industry where national and economic security overlap. And today I will discuss three main issues in this regard. The first is maintaining, developing, and strengthening the defense industry. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide. Thank you. In Japan, which does not have government arsenals, the defense industry is our defense capability, and it has responsibility for the SDF's logistics and R&D. The SDF could not perform its mission without the defense industry, and that defense industry is being pushed to the brink right now. There are several different reasons, but in 2014, the strategy for defense production and technology infrastructure was adopted to halt the decline of the defense industry. Yet, despite some success, companies have continued to withdraw from the defense business since then. The government needs to urgently shore up the defense industry by significantly increasing the defense budget and improving the procurement system. At the same time, management, shareholders, and the public need to be told about the role and importance of defense companies, which have been seen as some kind of specialized field, in a way that people can take pride in their role in protecting the lives of the people. Defense industry and civilian capabilities are indispensable to the SDF's operations in the event of contingencies, and a system that goes beyond contractual relationships is required to ensure this. The SDF's operations, based on the principle of exclusive defense, are basically the battlefield of Japan's national territory and its surrounding sea and airspace. So no other company for existing defense companies can make emergency repairs to fighter aircraft, communication systems, and other equipment damaged in battle, or produce necessary equipment and ammunition on an emergency basis. We need a system that secures civilian capabilities to support the missions and actions of the SDF in the event of an armed attack, and a system that increases the number of civilian engineers and employees who are willing to accept risk and support the SDF for the sake of national defense, and guarantees those engineers' status. Japan's defense industry is a small market with annual contracts of just over 2 trillion yen, which is about $16 billion, with the SDF as its only customer. Furthermore, fighter jets that were produced under license until the F-15 have now been shifted to FMS contracts with no technology disclosure for the F-35. To increase the value of contracts and build technology, Japan has to promote national projects such as international joint development and capacity. And Japanese defense companies have to build their capabilities. For this, it is essential to establish an information security system based on US standards, including a subcontractor system as in the US. And a security, we need to have a security clearance system which is studied under to be studied under the Economic Security Act. And this must be done with a sense of speed. Next slide, please. Next, I would like to talk about the use of emerging technologies for military and security purposes. In the war in Ukraine, emerging and civilian technologies such as drones, smartphones, and Starlink are playing an important role. The revolutionary evolution of technology is expanding the military domain into realms of space, cyber, and electromagnetic waves, transforming not only space, but also time. And they have drastically changed the face of combat and continue to do so. The military application of innovative new technologies is critically important for deterrence and response. This is a decisive technology. These form the double use allows us much faster response. China is building a military civilian technology R&D ecosystem through its military civilian fusion strategy, and the United States is doing the same through initiatives such as DARPA and the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU. One of the 6 supply chain enhancement measures announced by the US Biden administration in February of this year is the military industrial base. Japan's economic security law calls for a system to support development of advanced critical technologies, but it should also cover technologies critical to military security. At the same time, it's important for the Self-Defense Force to study future warfare scenarios with emerging technologies in mind and to present specific operational requirements that the SDF will need. its operational requirements and its needs should be announced. The Ministry of Defense introduced the Security Technology Research Promotion System in FY 2015 to invite applications for advanced civilian technologies. But those results have been limited because the Science Council of Japan has a policy of not undertaking military research. The Ministry of Defense is now introducing a new, quote, registration and certification system, and also a special zone for early stage equipment to solicit project proposals from private companies and startups. Prime Minister Kishida has emphasized national defense, including science and technology and nuclear energy, and has spoken of necessary defense expenditures as, quote, a comprehensive national effort, which is not included in the budget for Ministry of Defense. Japan's science and technology budget is on the order of 4 trillion yen, which is only 2.9%, of which only 2.9% is for national defense. Japan should invest 40% of its science and technology budget for innovative dual-use technology similar to the United States. With the efforts of the Ministry of Defense at its core, a group of companies, including traditional defense industries and emerging companies with dual-use technologies, manufacturing companies, and trading companies which supply foreign products and technical information, i.e. a security production technology infrastructure, should be established, which will reflect the SDF's requirements. The government must seek to foster an ecosystem in which various R&D, prototyping, test operations, and so forth can be conducted jointly. To provide incentives to companies which are not familiar with the military, costs and risks have to be borne by the government, and the significance and benefits of participation, as well as the disadvantages of not participating, must be explained in an easy to understand manner. The strategy document to be formulated at the end of this year must include effective measures that ensure these objectives are achieved. In the document which will come out this year, those objectives have to be reflected, and I would now ask for the next slide, please. My third topic is management of equipment transfer for enhanced security. Domestic technology transfer management is an important pillar of economic security, but even in this area, the boundary between military and non-military is losing its meaning, and a new approach is required. Japan strictly regulates exports of arms and other weapons through the 3 principles on equipment transfer and their operational guidelines, as well as through the security trade controls. Nevertheless, the Russian Orlan drone uses Japanese-made single-lens reflex cameras and small engines. Even though these items do not fall under our country's list and catch-all regulations, they are obviously being used in Russia's war of aggression. That cannot be denied. Meanwhile, to provide Ukraine with bulletproof vests, the government had to hold a meeting of the National Security Council with 4 cabinet ministers to revise the guidelines for equipment transfers, because bulletproof vests do fall under the category of weapons. However, it is only natural to support Ukraine, which is being invaded. And I think the current rigid operation in which the government cannot provide such equipment without a meeting of 4 cabinet ministers is a problem. In this light, we need to transform our export control system into a centralized export system consistent with our goals, with clear objectives, such as prohibiting self-interested arms transactions and avoiding unintended involvement in conflict. The domestic defense industry has developed and manufactured high-performance, high-price, special specification products exclusively for the SDF. In overseas markets, export performance remains poor due to problems that cannot be overcome by corporate efforts alone, including not only adaptation to local needs and price competitiveness, but also post-export training support and offset transaction requirements to improve our export performance. Therefore, military equipment transfers need to be government-led and commercialized with the understanding that the goal is not to protect the domestic defense industry, but contribute to Japan's national security. It is important to increase efforts to strengthen security cooperation with countries where equipment is going to be transferred, to build the competitiveness of participating companies, and to accumulate know-how on overseas transfers using the experience of Ministry of Defense's capacity building support program as a reference. Through this experience, it will be possible to improve the discernment and transfer management awareness of companies and government agencies. I believe that the three principles of equipment transfer and security trade control should be developed into a system that contributes to strengthening Japan's national security. Next, please. The defense production technology base is at the heart of national security and economic security. We hope the entire government and the public and private sectors will work together as soon as possible to protect, develop, and utilize this infrastructure. Thank you very much for listening.
はい、大上将軍どうもありがとうご
Thank
ざ
you,
いまし
General
た。
Oue, very much.
以上でパネリストの発言を終えます。
So we have now completed the comments by our panelists.
残りの14分で
We have 14
なるべ
minutes
く
left,
たくさんの質問を
during
取り上げ
which
たい
we
と思い
hope
ます。
to bring up as many questions as possible.
しかし、すべてはカバーできませんので、あら
We
かじ
will not be
め
able to cover
お許し
everything,
ください。
so we ask in advance for your understanding. Forgiveness on
皆
that.
様からいただいた質問よりも前に、
Before we
私か
get
ら
to the
一
questions
つ
we've received from
お尋
everyone,
ねした
I
いと思い
have
ます。
some question. I have a question I would like to ask.
それは、セキュリティクリアランスという言
That
葉につい
is
て、
about the word security clearance.
何人かの方がセキュリティクリア
Several
ラン
of you
ス
have
につい
mentioned
て
security
話されました。
clearance.
でも意味がわからないという人も中には
I
いる
think
と
there
思
are
います。
probably many people who are not sure what that means.
ここは多分、井形さんにお願いすべ
I
きかと
think
思うので
perhaps
す
I should
が、
ask Mr. Igata about this.
セキュリティクリアランスというのはどういうもの
What does this mean, security clearance?
これ
Mr.
が
Igata?
あるのとないのとで、どんな違いがあるのか、
And when we have it or don't have it, what kinds of changes or what kinds of differences exist
ご
with
説
and
明
without
い
it?
ただけます
If
で
you
しょう
could
か。
explain that to us, I would appreciate that.
Thank you very much. First of all, the term security clearance covers two elements, I believe. First, people. This person really sensitive information can be given. He can be given sensitive information. We can trust this person. And this is called the background check. His upbringing, has he taken out any loans? Has he gone abroad a lot? And so you look at various aspects of this person's past and try to determine if you can trust that person. That's one step. Let's say you can trust him, you say. Then you give him something called a clearance. And then someone who has a clearance, then depending on the level, can access information that is very highly classified or, depending on the case, at a medium level. So information is classified. So this also applies to the level of sensitivity of the information and who can access the various levels of information. It's a kind of a system that lays all of that out in detail. And why is it important? Let's say that the US, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, called the Five Eyes often, these five countries. Now, they each have equivalent clearance systems. They're not identical, but they're equivalent, which allows the US and the UK, for example, to share very sensitive information. The US can look at the UK and say, well, they have this kind of a system, and this person in the UK has the highest level of clearance. Therefore, even if we give some of our most highly classified information to this person, then it will probably not leak. And this allows for information sharing. Now, if there's no clearance system, then let's say there's someone you'd really like to share information with, but you're not able to tell if this person is trustworthy, which does not allow you to share information. That's what makes a clearance system necessary. But what's important here is that at the government level, there is the special secrets protection law in Japan. And so in the government, there is somewhat of a security clearance system already. And for very sensitive defense joint research, then some private sector individuals in Japan already are able to get clearances. But if you get the opinions of people in the Five Eyes, Japan's security clearance system is still insufficient. One important lacking element is that the security system should be expanded further to the private sector.
続けてそのフォローの質問なんですが、
This is a follow-up question to that.
たくさんの人をバックグラウンドチェックするには、
To check the backgrounds of a large number of people would require some centralized agency. We don't have such an organization in Japan, do we?
こういう
What would we
質問
do
がありま
about
す。
that? I think this question would arise.
Correct. There are lots of ways of approaching this question. In Australia, AGSMA is an agency that does in fact do coordination across all agencies, but who does the actual background checks? About 30 different places. Let's say 30 different private companies that can be contracted, that are trusted by the government. So hundreds and thousands of people would have to be hired in the Japanese government to do all the background checks themselves? No. The Japanese government could approve certain trusted outside contractors to do that work.
ありがとうございました。
Thank
新
you.
井さん、2つお尋ねしたいと思います。
Arai, I have
一
two
つ
questions
は
I want to ask you.
三
One
菱
is、
川崎といった日
Mitsubishi
本のディフ
Kawasaki,
ェンスコントラクターの企業、
Japan's defense contractors.
こういう会社は、 例えば
Companies like
近隣
this,
の中国などから
for
嫌がら
example,
せを受けたりしていません
have
か？
received, don't they receive threats or other untoward advances from Japan, from China, excuse me.
中国、それから他の国も含めてですね。
Or not only China, but other countries as well.
それが一つ。もう
That's
一つ
one
の質問は、
question I have. Another is,
これからいろいろな国
as we go
際的な
forward,
スタンダードというものを
various international standards must be created.
アメリカはじめ、それぞれ
Starting
こ
with
の
the
スタンダードを作ることを努力していると思います。
I think all of these countries are creating,
日本
are
の努力は
working
足り
hard
ないの
on
ではないか。
creating these international standards.
こういう
Does
質問を
do Japan's efforts not measure
フロア
up?
から
Are
来て
they
い
not?
ま
Are
す。
they insufficient? I think that's one of the questions that's come in.
いかがでしょう、この2つについ
What
て。
do you think, Mr. Arai, about that? First, on the first point, Mitsubishi, Kawasaki, are they receiving threats or other untoward advances from China? I don't know about that. They do business, Mitsubishi and Kawasaki, in China. I don't know how that relates to their defense work in the US. So I don't know about that. On the second point, international standards, it is something that Japan needs to work harder on. For Japan, Japanese, they work since the Meiji period have worked hard to comply with various standards and rules. But they have not been that positive or aggressive about creating such rules. That's a reality. In the sports world as well, this comes up often. As Japan gets stronger, the rules change, and then so that they can't win. So for international rules or treaties, there have been lots of instances in which the person who creates the rules comes out ahead, and Japan's not being that aggressive is a fact in creating such rules. Why that is, I know about ISO or JIS, which are created with referencing international standards. Those things are left to private industry, but there are instances in which it's not that effective, or it doesn't pay well for private industry to do this. Whereas in EU, it is the EU itself that creates such rules. In China, where EU is succeeding in that way, and the US has created the international order. So China is standing on at the forefront, spending lots of money and personnel on trying to create its own international order. So there's no question that Japan needs to spend more money and personnel. The government needs to get serious about creating more international standards and rules. That's all.
はい、ありがとうございました。
Thank you very much.
時間がなくなってまいりましたが、
we have run out of time.
Science Council of Japan というの
Science
があり
Council of
ます。
Japan is something we have.
ここが軍事に関する研究はしてはいけないと。
Is by law
いう
not
方針を
to
出している。
do military related, they have a policy of not doing military related research.
そのせいで大学が
as a
なかな
result,
か自衛隊防衛省と一緒に
the
研究をしておりま
universities
せん。
cannot do research with the self-defense force or the Ministry of Defense.
このことをどう考えればいいのか。
So how should we think about this?
何か解決策はあるか。
Is there some solution to this?
残りの3分でどなたか
with the
お
three
話しい
minutes,
ただ
with
け
the
る
3
方いま
minutes
すか。
left, could we ask someone to comment on that? Is there
大
anyone
上
who'd
さん
like to?
か
For
新井さん
example,
か。
Oe-san or Arai-san.
私から一
Ah,
点だけ申し上げます。
Okay, let me just say one point.
軍事研究というのは、
military
いろいろ
research
な理由があって、
for many different reasons
場合は難しい。
in Japan is a difficult thing to do. I understand that, but on the other hand, military and the border between military and non-military is becoming increasingly meaningless because of dual use. This is where we need to, from academic research standpoint, it becomes increasingly meaningless to draw a line between those two things. Therefore, it is possible to do research and without limitations, and the result that comes out of that research, the technology that comes out of that, can be used in various different ways. I think that for the country, this is something that we need to place emphasis on, and the people who create the fruits of such research should be able to take advantage of that. That, in terms of a policy, I think that it's impossible to create limitations or restrictions in this way. May I? May I add one point, please? By all means. This issue starts with the fact that people in universities have a very old-fashioned understanding of national security with the memory of the Second World War. Defense is something which they feel very negative about. That's a fact. But with Ukraine being invaded by Russia, if they can understand through this the current world situation, they can see that defending Japan is defending Japanese people, and that as the national public, this is something that's necessary. Citizens for the there haven't been very positive, realistic information that's come to the people from not only universities, but to the people themselves. There hasn't been a lot of information. Information has been withheld from Department of Defense and so forth. When we look at this in a comparative point of view with other countries, where much more PR is done to communicate information to the citizens, we need to see more of this done from the Ministry of Defense, from the government, to talk about the realities of the military, including the universities. These things need to be explained better, so that I think that within a very relatively short time, we can get to, as other countries have, a higher understanding among the people. That's all.
いつものことなのですけれども、パーティーが盛り上がりを見せたところで、
Thank you.
突然
Just
終わ
as
りを
always, just
告げ
when
なければ
we're
なりませ
reaching
ん。
the peak of the party, we have to end
でも、会を重ねるに従って、たくさんの質問、
by having many
たくさんのコメント
opportunities
が
to handle questions, comments.
これが最高
This
の過程
has
となって、
been, I think, a
次の会を
wonderful
考えること
process
ができます。
under which we can think about the next
どうか皆さん、
opportunity.
この集まりにレギュラーと
And
して、
everyone,
今後も加
please,
わってくだ
as
さい。
regular attendees, as regular participants, can we ask for your future contributions to this
すべての人を代表しまして、今
meeting?
日、
Representing
くだ
everyone
さった
here
4人
today,
のパネルの
I
方
want to
に
thank the
心
four
からの感
panelists
謝を
today from
申し上げた
my
いと思
heart
います。そしていつも
for
の
your
ように、
participation. And as always,
クリス・フィールドとポール・ハウシー、
we thank our
2
interpreters,
人のインタープリターに
Chris Field and
心
Paul
からの
Horsey,
感謝を申し上げて、おし
for
まい
their
といた
work
します。
interpreting.
本当に参加いただきまして、皆様
Thank you
ありがとう
everyone
ござ
for
い
your
ました。
participation.
では、次回またお目にかかりましょう。
Okay, let us meet again next time.
The radars of the future are smart, connected, and being built today. Raytheon is pushing the limits of advanced manufacturing from the ground up, building on a 60-year legacy of innovation infused with today's most innovative technologies. In our world-class radar development facilities, robots work autonomously alongside skilled engineers, setting new benchmarks for efficiency, productivity, quality assurance, and safety. Cutting-edge automation and process optimization are helping reduce cost and increase speed of delivery. From autonomous material movement and unmanned vehicles to an industry-first dual robotic system, advanced manufacturing at Raytheon enables production to be smarter, safer, and faster, giving engineers and technicians time to solve the complex challenges of tomorrow. Raytheon, reimagining the future of radars.